we have a really great speaker here who's returned to us this morning, Police Chief Hahn. Daniel Hahn was sworn in as Sacramento's 45th Chief of Police on August 11th in 2017. He was hired by the Sacramento Police Department as a community service officer in 1987 and rose quickly through the ranks to captain. He served in numerous assignments, including Special Investigations Commander, Patrol Commander, and Personnel Division Commander. In 2011, he was sworn in as Roseville's 15th Chief of Police and served there for 6 years before coming back home to Sacramento. Chief Hahn holds a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's in public administration. As Sacramento's police chief, he's handled controversial issues, implemented new strategies to build transparency in our community, and improve the department's process of recruiting, hiring, and training. Chief Hahn is a member of the California Police Chiefs Association and has been honored with the Exemplary Leaders Award, Service Above Self Award, Community Service Award, and Innovation for Change Award. So kind of a great guy if you didn't know already. He's a committed and proud father of 2 incredible daughters and a dedicated husband to his beautiful and always supportive wife, Katrina. In his spare time, I don't know how he finds any, he enjoys spending time with his family and watching his daughter's sporting events. Before Chief Hahn comes up, I just want to make sure that you know we will have an opportunity for some Q&A. We have some note cards floating around the room. If you have a question for Chief Hahn, please just raise your hand. Sherry's got some over here. Aaron Teague has some in the back. We will bring you a note card so you can write it down, and we'll make sure that Chief Hahn has a chance to answer your questions. Chief Hahn, thank you for being here. You're up.
Good morning. So I'm probably going to take this mask off somewhat through this since I'm more than 6 feet away from you, and I don't want to pass out from not being able to breathe. First question I have is there anybody in here that has any children or any relatives at all that go to St. Francis? All right, good. I'm so happy at least somebody raised their hand. All right, so, you know, in the intro it said that in my spare time I watch my daughters play sports. So my oldest daughter plays comp volleyball, comp soccer, school volleyball, and school soccer. So pretty much 2 practices every day if there's no game. My youngest daughter plays travel softball, which is, in my opinion, just completely insane. Traveling to LA like every single weekend here next month. But the reason I asked about St. Francis is last night there was this little game at Pleasant Grove High School where my daughters go between St. Francis volleyball and Pleasant Grove volleyball. And those St. Francis girls walked in like they were going to own us. They did own us for the first 2 sets, but it was a pretty amazing game and an even more amazing atmosphere of high school sports with the students yelling and screaming in the stands, stomping, saying cheers. And by the way, Pleasant Grove pulled it off and whooped those troubadours. So we are 1-0 against the favored St. Francis, and we play them again, unfortunately, at St. Francis, so they'll have a chance to get us back. And then lastly, before I get started, is I don't know if it was mentioned, but I have announced my retirement for the end of this year. So sometime in December, I still got to do that paperwork stuff that I hate to do. So maybe I won't retire if I don't get that stuff in. But so I'll just shameless plug. I'm not running for sheriff. I'm not running for mayor. I didn't get fired. It's just time to go. And I'm not ready to retire, so I am looking for another job. So if any of you know of a good job that I could have come January, I would like to start January 1st. So just shameless plug. So lastly, I just want to say thank you to all of you being in the real estate business in some form or fashion. You are really the entry to our community for many, many people. Whether it's people moving here, I just listened to the radio over here. Apparently everybody's leaving California. That's interesting because I'm not leaving and nobody I know is leaving. But everybody's supposedly leaving California, yet you're still selling houses and we don't have enough houses. So you are really the entry to our community for many people who are moving here or changing neighborhoods. And contrary to popular belief, with all the division that we see, not only in our community, but in our country, it takes all of us to be successful, working together. And so, as we've seen over the last couple years, cities burning, people being killed, people being severely injured during protests for any number of things, especially here in Sacramento, being the capital of California, our city did not burn. We did not have anybody killed in a protest anyway. And we, relatively speaking, compared to the rest of the country, did pretty good. And it's not because of me. It's not because of any particular officer on the street. It's because of us. It's because us as a community had enough, whatever you want to call it, that we didn't go down the same road as many other cities. And it's important that we all recognize that. And it's kind of where I want to go today. So over the last year or two, we've had protests, we've had COVID. It's so awesome to be, my assistant said, you can do today's meeting either virtually or in person. I said, in person? Really? She's like, yeah, they're doing it in person. I'm like, well, I'm choosing in person for sure, because I'm tired of doing things virtually. You can't have the same conversations virtually. You cut each other off all the time because you have no idea when somebody else is going to start talking. It's just crazy. I mean, we've learned to adapt to it a little bit, but it's so much better to see all of you here today. So we've had COVID that has changed so many things. We've had protests that have changed so many things. Today, we're having a recall election that's very divided and very divisive, that has people hurling insults at each other every day. I don't know what it is about the rising violence across the country, but it's like we forgot how to be around each other. So now when we do get around each other, we punch flight attendants, all number of things that you've surely seen way too many videos. And the way we're going to get through this is together. One of the things that ails us the most, not just in Sacramento, but across the country, is the issue of housing. And not just for homeless issues, but housing is what has made the haves and the have-nots in this country, or one of the major things that has created the haves and the have-nots. It's created the neighborhood I grew up in of Oak Park. It's created Del Paso Heights and Meadowview. And real estate has been a big part of that. Redlining was largely supported by real estate associations. Prop 14 in 1964 was funded and put forward by real estate associations. But you're also the people that sell people homes, that get people into their first homes, their step-up homes, and all those other things. So we have to do this together. If we single out, like in this case, law enforcement all by themselves and say, if we fix law enforcement, we fixed everything, we will fail. It's not just law enforcement. We have a lot of work to do in law enforcement, don't get me twisted. But it's not just law enforcement, it's all of us working together. For example, if you say, well, we have too many people in prison and we need to let them out, but we don't have any resources for people when they get let out, reentry programs, mental health programs, drug programs, then we have what we had the other night in Land Park, which is not good. It's about the worst crime anybody could ever commit. Complete stranger rape and murder, and tried to burn her house down from somebody with a long criminal history. So I do believe that we need to do better with the people that we arrest, because I know many people, Brother to Brother is a great organization that, maybe one day you could have them here. They're very enlightening, but they're all men that have done the founder did 21 years in prison, and he's doing amazing work right now. We need to utilize them to help people coming back into our communities from being incarcerated. So crime is rising, division is up, but I know the solution, and it's us. It's not pointing fingers at each other, it's us meeting, being able to disagree, discussing that, and moving forward with good solutions. Because the solutions we come up with are not solutions. They are not. We need good solutions. And I'll just give you a couple of examples before I go back into some real estate stuff. So a few years back, maybe 3-4 years ago, we completed our body camera program where every one of our members wear body cameras, from community service officers to detectives to police officers. And you find any variation of that across our country, to no body cameras, to only patrol wears body cameras, to any variation of that. And it was really sold as the solution to where we would not see violence in our community with police officers involved. And don't get me wrong, body cameras are awesome. Any police department or law enforcement agency that doesn't have body cameras it needs some mental health help. But it is not the solution. It helps with accountability and it helps with transparency, but it is not the solution. But we sold it as a solution because it's pretty easy. Any government raised maybe $1 million can buy all the body cameras, maybe about $1 million a year for storage, and then probably another $1 million a year for redaction people, and whammo presto, you have a body camera program. And now we watch officers shooting people on body cameras. Didn't stop it. Didn't stop what's going on in our community because it didn't go to the heart of what ails us. What ails us is us. Is us being divided, not addressing the real issues, and that's where all of you come in. A few years ago, I think it was 2 years ago when probably the last time I came here, I offered, hey, if you would like, I will drop off a bunch of bags of information of how a new person in our community can get in touch with all sorts of resources, especially the police department. And you guys all said okay. And so I dropped off, 100 bags over in the other side of the office. It's stuff like that, yeah, you're not law enforcement, but you're the first people meet when they come to our city. And what impression are they going to get of our city? That we're together, that we work together, or are they going to get the impression that I can't figure out any way to get anywhere? And I'll give you another example. You can talk to some officers that say, my job, if you want to meet the most secretive police officer in the world, go talk to a homicide detective. They won't tell you anything. They're holding everything so close to the vest, they don't want anything to mess up their case. They don't want anything to mess up the court proceedings. So, when I used to be a PIO, we would arrest somebody for homicide. So I'd walk down to the homicide division, get my little notepad out. Okay, what's his name? Who did we arrest? The homicide sergeant. I'm a sergeant in the same department. They would go, who wants to know? I'm like, clearly me. I'm the one asking. And they're like, why do you want to know? And I'm like, well, because somebody got arrested for murder and the media is going to want to know. Yeah, we're not going to tell you. I'm like, dude, I've known you for like 20 years. Why are you not telling me? And so I would say to the homicide sergeant, all the reporter has to do is go down to the jail. The booking logs are public. And look for how many people got arrested for murder today. I'm guessing it's 1. And then they're going to have the name, but then they're going to be mad at us for refusing to tell them a public information. So then they'd reluctantly give it to me. But here's what we've done. I took a detective completely out of his detective role, and he's amazing. That he is assigned to all the families that have traumatic events in our city, mainly either homicides in our community or the family of an officer-involved shooting. And his job is like a victim advocate. And what I continue to see is these families who lost a loved one have so many frustrations just getting answers or getting to where they're trying to go, whether it's from the DA's office, from us, from anything. And it was just like re-victimizing the families. And oftentimes you would hear, well, those families are, gang families or a very dysfunctional family. And I just liken it back to, in 1992, my younger brother, 2 years younger than me, was murdered downtown at 19th and G. He had gotten involved in the drug world, using drugs and selling drugs, and his drug dealing partner, in a state of paranoia one night, killed him, shot him in the head. And so my mom knew he was in drugs. He was not good for our community and the neighborhood at that time. He's selling drugs and doing all sorts of things that people addicted to drugs do. But when I called my mom, she cried the same, like a little baby, as if he was the president of the United States, because it was her youngest son, even though he was probably not the greatest person for our community at that moment. But also growing up with him, I know he got on a different road than his whole life once he got addicted to drugs. If we had gotten him back on his original road, he would have been amazing. Wanted to be a veterinarian. He would have done amazing things, I have no doubt, but because I knew him his whole life. And so we have to treat people and work together differently. And so I'll just give one example. There's a young lady that grew up in the same neighborhood I did. She's probably 20 years younger than me, so I didn't know her growing up, but we've become friends over the last several years. Her son was murdered in Oak Park, like 3 years ago. And she called me one day, and she's a pretty tough lady. I haven't seen her cry too many times. But she calls me angry and crying one day on the phone, and I'm thinking if she, I almost said her name. If she's crying, holy Jesus, did she beat the snot out of somebody? Like, she doesn't cry too often. She's pretty tough. And she was so frustrated because she goes, my son died a couple years ago, and I haven't gotten any of his property. I don't have his grill. I don't have his jewelry. I don't even know all that he had when he was shot. And it's been over 2 years, and all I do is get bounced around from phone number to phone number. She goes, I am so pissed off at your department right now. And I'm thinking, well, she probably got a hold of some homicide detective that's in the middle of a different homicide, and he's probably like, I ain't got time for this. I got an interview. I got a suspect. So I just called Conrad, our victim advocate detective, and I said, hey, can you at least see if you can get her some of her property? By the end of that day, she had every bit of her son's property because we work differently. And so as real estate agents, I really encourage you, don't just think you're selling, and most of you, if not all of you, probably already think this way, but don't just think you're selling this home to this family. You're selling our community. And you can help connect them to different resources, if you know the resources, that they are going to need to be successful in this community. We want people to move here and stay here and be productive members of our community. And that doesn't consist of solely being a homeowner. That consists of being engaged in their neighborhood, being engaged in their neighborhood watch or their next door or the other resources in their community to know their neighbors. And I wish I could say I knew all my neighbors. I preach this and then I don't know all, but I do know the neighbor across the street from me and next to me. And whenever any of us goes on vacation, we all talk to each other. We get the mail for Stu and Cindy next to us. We check on the house for Jerry across the street. They check on our house. We all know when we're gone. And I think I might have told this story last time I was here, but I'm not the guy that walks around the neighborhood, get off my lawn, and keeps track of everything. But I do pay attention when I come home, especially over the last couple of years with death threats and officers guarding my family and all those sort of things. But this is actually a little bit before all that started. I come home one day and there's a car parked in Stu and Cindy's driveway, and I know they're in Palm Springs. And they really make me angry because when they go on vacation, they go to Palm Springs, Hawaii, and they're there for like a month. I'm like, what? They're both retired. I'm like, you're gone again? You were just gone like 3 months ago. Yep, we're going again for another month. I'm like, you guys piss me off. But I see this car, and when they leave, they always say, my daughter is going to check on, this is the kind of car she has, and da-da-da. And I think she used to have, I don't remember exactly, but she used to have like a Corolla or something like that. So I come home one day, and I see a Mustang parked in the driveway. I'm like, oh. So I don't come in the house right away, so my wife comes into the garage. What is going on? I'm standing in my driveway, and I'm staring at the car. I'm looking around. She goes, okay, what are you doing? And I go, you see that car over there? That ain't Stu's daughter's car. I'm gonna go check it out. She goes, you're so stupid. And I go, what are you talking about? She goes, he called and said his daughter got a new car. That's her car. And I'm like, all right, just making sure. So every time I stop on the porch or something, she comes out, what are you finding now? I'm like, well, that car, I literally been in a pursuit in my neighborhood. I saw a car parked in front of my house when I'm leaving one day at 7 o'clock in the morning. And there's a guy in the car sitting right in front of our house, a car I've never seen before. I drove by and I'm like, no, I'm not letting that slide. So I turn around, I park behind, I'm getting ready to get out of my car to go say, hey, who are you? Vroom, the car takes off, like at 80 down a residential street. I chased him for a little bit until he did 80 through stop signs. And I'm like, okay, I'm stopping. But it's that kind of effort that we have to have in our neighborhoods to not only keep us safe, but it also builds community. My mom used to say, I grew up in Oak Park, and before she moved to Oak Park, she lived out by Country Club Plaza off of, Watt Avenue or whatever it is. And I think I was only one when she moved from there to down in Sac. But she used to tell me, I love living in Oak Park so much more than I did out by Country Club. And I'd be like, why? Because Country Club was even nicer then than it is now. I don't know how nice it is now, but it was really nice then. And she said, because in country club, she kind of did what I do now. You come home, hit the garage door open, bzzz, drive your car in. Before you even get out of your car, half the time you hit the garage door open. Bzzz. In Oak Park, our garage was about the size of this podium, so nobody parked their car in it. And so you'd sit on your porch, you'd know all your neighbors, you'd stand out in front and talk. Now we get irritated if the neighbor comes over and talks. I'm busy, go away. So you as real estate agents are really the gateway to our city so many times, can provide good advice, can help change this housing stuff if you help people get into their first home at good rates, not I'm going to get repossessed in a couple of years kind of rates. And so just thank you for not only being in the real estate industry, but being good members of our community, because I am convinced that the people in this community are collectively is why our city didn't burn during some of these protests, and why hopefully we will change things in our community that in the future, when my daughters get my age, that they will not have to have these same conversations that we have around race and difference and neighborhood and all those sort of things. And I'll end on this, just something to think about. We get people killed about every week, if not more multiple times in a week, in neighborhoods like Del Paso Heights, Oak Park, and Meadowview. And I would guess that most of the time you hear nothing about that. And as tragic as the woman that was killed in Land Park, we've heard a lot about that. We've heard, what are you going to do about that? Not just police department, but the politicians and everybody. We've heard politicians sending out tweets and press releases and all sorts of things. We've seen the media investigate what's the cause of this man being out of jail and out on zero bail or out on parole, or all the different things that I've heard said. When we start talking about people that get killed in Del Paso Heights and Oak Park and Meadowview like that, we will come a long ways. It's somebody's life that's being lost, regardless of the activity that they're involved in. And yes, a lot of those murders are people involved in gang activity and drug activity. But there's one reason why I'm not involved in that kind of activity, and that's because I was adopted at 3 months old. One thing changed the trajectory of my life. If that hadn't happened, I'd probably be like a lot of my friends, gone to prison, killed, because my mom was amazing, and had she not chosen to adopt me, and oh, by the way, it's about the most unlikely adoption that you've ever seen if you listen to the divisive comments that we have in our country. My mom is a white woman, my dad is a white man. Obviously, I'm not. My mom grew up on a farm in Minnesota, did not see a black person until she was a teenager. My dad grew up on a farm, very poor, in Nebraska. His dad died of the same thing my dad died when he was 10. And so then he had to work on the farm. He joined the Navy, fought in the Korean War, and paid for his college education through the military GI Bill. And they moved to Sacramento because he was an engineer, and he came here, and what was really important to him was funding for his family should he die early, because his dad died when he was young and they were broke. And then, of course, he did die when I was 5 years old. My brother was 10 and my sister was 9. My sister was born with hydrocephalus and has significant mental and physical disabilities. So now my mom, when I'm 5, brother's 10, sister's 9, is in Sacramento, California with no family other than community, which she did consider family. And my mom raised me my entire life in the heart of Oak Park, 33rd and 2nd Avenue. My mom bought our house for $26,000. It's worth almost $1 million now. It's probably 150 years old. And she gave that house away for free to Dan and Rosalie Hagstrom, who still live there to this day. She called me one day and said, a couple weeks ago, I met the Hagstroms at church. My mom was the choir director and the organist of our church. And I'm like, okay, great. You met somebody at church. Tell me something that doesn't happen like every single day for you. She goes, are you okay with me giving them our house? And I'm in my 20s. I'm a police officer already. And I'm like, I wasn't shocked because every car we ever owned, my mom gave away. But I'm like, you're going to just give them the house? Just give it to them? She goes, yeah. And I paused for a second. I got my head out of the you-know-what. And I said, well, Mom, it's your house. Do what you want. And she goes, well, you guys put a lot of work into it. And we did. We tore down walls, dug up the sewer at least once. It was child slave labor. She had no problem with that. We had to work 8 hours in the summertime before we could go play, because you're a member of this family. And I say it to my daughters all the time, but I don't actually follow through with it. If you do something for the family, you don't get paid. If you want to get paid for washing a car, go wash the neighbor's car, but you ain't getting paid for washing our car. That's our car. This is family. So anything we did around the house, we didn't get anything for. So I washed a lot of neighbors' cars, mowed a lot of neighbors' lawns. But my mom gave this house to the Hagstroms, and she told us, my brother and I, that the reason she wanted to give it to them is because this is an old house, a very large house, and she didn't want to give it to somebody that's just going to use it as a moneymaker, meaning separate it into different apartments and rent out 5 or 6 units within this house. She wanted to give it to somebody that's going to care for this old house, because it's an old house. It needs care and feeding. And she wants to give it to somebody that's going to care for Oak Park. Even though she wasn't from Oak Park, she was very in love with Oak Park. And to this day, the Hagstroms use that house to assist Cash and City of Refuge with women who are escaping sex trafficking, to provide housing for them in many of the rooms, one of which was my room growing up, that I found out on a call in the neighborhood that a young lady escaping sex trafficking. She was shocked when I described the hallway and the room. She's like, that's my room. I was shocked too. I'm like, wait a minute, you're living in my room? Who knew? But that's the kind of thing that changes people's lives and changes neighborhoods. And those are the kind of things that all of you in the work that you do can be part of, not only in your professional life, but in your personal life. And nobody, unless you're from Oak Park, has probably ever heard of my mom, ever. And she did it anyway. And because she decided, somebody that didn't see a black person until she was a teenager, when the Rust College choir was traveling across the country and was driving through Painesville, Minnesota, and my grandmother, my mom's mom, who was a middle school music teacher, brought them over to the farmhouse for dinner. Now imagine, they didn't have TVs or anything. The first time you ever saw a black person was when they're sitting having dinner with you, probably 20 black people having dinner with you. And she raised me in Oak Park. She adopted a black child. So when I hear all white people are bad, all black people are violent, my life itself shows that that is not true. You change one thing about most people. There are some Jeffrey Dahmers in the world. Now those kind of people, if for some reason you hold a whole human being in your freezer to eat later, I'm not talking about you. That person just needs to be locked up somewhere and away from human beings. But most people that we see committing violent crime are somebody, if they had my mom take them under their wing when they were 3 months old, they wouldn't be doing that. They wouldn't. And so when we look at neighborhoods that are filled with violent crimes, there are people in those neighborhoods that just did not have my mother, or didn't have you, or somebody else to take them under their wing and be disappointed in them and show them, mentor them, and show them the way to do good things. They were raised by the street. They were raised by people that if you disrespect their neighborhood, they kill you. They were raised by people that had a whole different value system because all they had was their neighborhood, this false sense of neighborhood. All they had was this false sense of respect. So all of us can be the difference in that, every one of us. And I'll end on this and take questions. My wife is a school teacher, and what has happened over the last year, in my opinion, is pretty shameful. So as I watched over the last year, private schools, St. Francis, Jesuit, Christian Brothers, all, you name them, they were open. They were going to school. Now, they had a lot of rules and regulations, but they were going to school. Not to mention, most people that go to those schools have the means to overcome emergencies. My wife teaches in what would be considered inner city schools in the Elk Grove School District. Not only did many of her kids not have laptops when we went to Zoom, but many of them didn't have Wi-Fi. And the ones that did have Wi-Fi was in and out constantly. So you have students in her class that are already behind before COVID hit. Then it took them weeks to get a laptop. Then even though they have a laptop, they have shady Wi-Fi. So now you're teaching a lesson in math, and every other minute the Wi-Fi goes out in that student's home. So you're just getting farther and farther behind. So one student in particular, I won't name her name, in her class, she says, great student, but just is behind. And her Wi-Fi is horrible. And so she's just frustrated. This year, she has a homeless kid in her class that lives in their car. She says he comes to school about every third day. Now, how far behind is that kid going to get? But so I'm like calling everybody I know, okay, how could we help this homeless kid? So we're working with the school district to at least get a hotel or something for them, at least, every so often, see what we can do. But the one from last year, I'm like, look, I'll tell you what, we will pay out of our pocket. We'll pay for somebody to go to the home and check their Wi-Fi, see what the heck is wrong with the Wi-Fi, why it goes out. Although our Wi-Fi isn't the greatest either. It's Comcast, by the way. But when our daughters went on Zoom, so I offered, let's pay for Wi-Fi. Let's get her a tutor in the summertime so she can start catching up from even falling farther behind. Now, there's still challenges with that. Grandma never called us back, those kind of things. But when our kids went to Wi-Fi because COVID, my oldest daughter had a laptop, but my youngest daughter did not have a laptop. You know what we did? That very first day, we drove our happy selves over to Best Buy, and we plopped down $900 that day and bought her a laptop like it was nothing, because we have the means to do that. My mom wouldn't have been able to do that when I was a kid. So many parents are not able to do that, so they just get farther and farther behind, and it hurts all of us. So with your position in our society as real estate agents and everything else you probably do on the side, I just ask and beg that when there's a spot for you to help, help. Because too much is given, much is expected. And if we don't do that, we will have segments of our society that fall further and further behind, and we won't notice until they're protesting in the middle of our streets. And they've been protesting in the middle of our streets for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it's not going to stop until we change something. And we need to change some things. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. No questions, great.
Can you hear me? If you have a question, Aaron or Sherry will bring you a note card if you could write it down. While they're doing that, Chief Hahn, since it's Realtor Safety Month, can you give us your top 3 tips for realtors out on the job, how we can keep ourselves safe when we're out there doing what we do?
Yeah, I would give you the similar tip that I give everybody. The human body is this amazing thing. When the hair on the back of your neck stands up, but you can't really figure out why, there's just something that is not right about the situation you're walking into. Trust yourself. Trust yourself. Back out. Call the police or call a fellow real estate agent. I'm sure you've heard all too many times of people, that aren't really interested in buying the house, just trying to get a real estate agent to the house so they can attack you or do whatever. If you have some funny feeling, have a real estate agent go with you. Or if it gets really bad, call the police. But do not go, well, I'm just tripping, I'll go. Don't do that. The human body is an amazing thing that you can't understand all the time. But when your body's telling you something's wrong, something is probably wrong. And if nothing's wrong, great. You still took the precautions and everything worked out. But I would just say in this day and age, you cannot be too careful. I mean, you don't need to be paranoid schizophrenic with a bulletproof vest on at all times. But when something doesn't seem right, trust your body. It's probably not right. So call for help, whether it's another real estate agent or call the police. You are not bothering us. Our officers are working their 10-hour shift no matter whether you call or not. And if there's somebody being shot at the same time you call, guess what? We're going to go to the shooting first. So you're not harassing us, you're not bothering us, it is our job. And if we get there and nothing was wrong and you were just tripping, great, that is our job, to tell you nothing's wrong. So now you can feel comfortable and go about your business. Otherwise, you're gonna be walking around with the hair standing up on the back of your neck, and if it stands up more than 10 minutes, it falls out.
Thank you. I know we do have a virtual audience today, and we have a question from our virtual audience.
All
So
right.
can you speak, Chief Hahn, to the communication and cooperation between the Sac City Police Department and our County Sheriff's Department?
Yeah, I would say as a general rule, the people that do the work, the people at the line level on the street get along great. And the cooperation is awesome, right? An officer, SAC PD officer gets in a pursuit, the Sheriff's Department comes and assists. Sheriff's Department gets in a pursuit, police officer assists. Or some big situation, we work very closely together. Except, not as much today, but back in the day when I was a younger person, when we played pig bowl, we didn't get along real well. And we'd like to talk trash the rest of the year if we won. And we won a lot. Just like PG did over St. Francis last night. I'll probably say that 6 more times because it was such an awesome game. The problem usually comes in at people at my level, right? And when we get involved in politics and dividing, but I would say the relationship is pretty good right now. And it needs to continue to be good. And one of the things I constantly preach is if the Sheriff's Department lacks trust, that impacts us. Because people don't always divide law enforcement into departments. It's just law enforcement. So if something really bad happens in the Sheriff's Department, that impacts us. So we should be working together. We should be helping each other. We should be learning from each other's experience. I can't tell you how many departments call our department right now in regards to body camera and video release because we've been doing it for so long. And we got our teeth kicked in at first when we weren't real good at it, but we've learned. We picked up our little chiclet teeth and put them back in. And we've, in my opinion, have gotten pretty good at it. So we just had corrections. Corrections is getting ready to add a bunch of body cameras, and I told them, don't just go through the same mistakes we did. Come learn, come here, learn from what we did. And so they were just here last week touring around our computer lab and our redaction teams and getting our policies and all that. And they will adopt whatever they need. But there's we have to work together. We can't continue to have some horrific looking incident in, say, Baltimore and expect it not to affect us here in Sacramento. It will. It's on the media within seconds. It's on social media within seconds. We have to get better. So I'd say we get along really well. Not to mention, in case you don't know, the Sheriff's Department runs the jail. So anytime we arrest somebody that we book them, we are taking them to the Sheriff's Department. So they hugely impact us. And so we have to work together every day, no matter whether we like it or not. So we need to get along.
Thank you. We have several questions, so I'm not sure we'll get to everybody's today, but there's definitely a little bit of a theme here and probably no surprise to you. Can you speak to the efforts to help get homeless off the streets here in Sacramento, and what can we do as a Realtor Association to aid in that effort?
That is a great question, very political question. So I think what we fail to realize when it comes to homeless is, it's like when people say the black community thinks X. Good luck with that. The black community thinks a lot of different things. There's no one thing that all black people think. Same thing with homeless. People are not homeless for one thing. There's a myriad of things. There are some themes that run through a large percentage of the homeless community: mental health and drug addiction. Those are 2 huge themes that run through a high percentage of the homeless community. We like to talk about the families with the kids that just lost their job and now they're living out of their car. That does happen, not as frequently as the other 2. And those are very easy to solve. Right? You get them housing, you give them a little assistance if they don't have these other challenges of mental health and drugs. They're back on their feet. They just need a little bit of help to, they've fallen down. They just need to help stand them up. But when you have drug addiction and mental health, you can't just stand them up. Right? There's other assistance that need. So when we talk about, all we need is housing, well, we need a lot more than housing. Because if you put somebody with drug addiction and mental health issues into housing, they will not survive in that housing. They will violate rules. They will do all sorts of things. And then a lot of times we go, well, the homeless people, they don't want housing, which is true. If you go out to the homeless community, you go, I got an apartment, they'll tell you no. We took the mayor out about 2 years before COVID. To some camps downtown, Alhambra, W Street, that area. And he probably talked to about 20 people that day. Everyone he asked, hey, we're getting ready to build this shelter that's now up there at X in Alhambra. At the time, nothing had been started yet, but they had been voting on putting the site there. And every single person he asked if they would go to that homeless shelter told him no. Nope, won't go. Crazy people in those shelters. It's not safe. One woman I remember saying, you know, my grandkids come and visit me, but they don't allow grandkids in the shelter, so I wouldn't go there. And for the longest, not anymore, but for the longest, shelters didn't take animals. And if you know anybody in the homeless community that with a dog, that's their support system. So if you don't take their dog, they ain't going. So now a lot of shelters do they have kennels and stuff like that. So eventually we learned. Took us a while. But the answer to the homeless issue is, one, there is no real great answer. Two, it's a collaborative, holistic answer. It's not just housing. It's mental health services. It's drug services, adequate mental health services and drug services. When I was a young officer on patrol, we had the mental health center right across from UC Davis. And it took me about 15 minutes to be able to take somebody that was a danger to themselves or others over to the mental health service. I filled out one piece of paper, one page, check boxes, name, that stuff. I dropped them off, and I left. Took me about 15 minutes as a police officer. It was great. And now they're in a center with mental health professionals, people with a lot of letters after their name. That place closed. So now our officers take them to ER, the worst place we could probably take people to, the most expensive place we could probably take people to, the least equipped place to probably take people with mental health distress. So they usually get their physical ailments dealt with, and they're let out the front door. Mental health is still raging. And so now, anytime it plays out on the street, who do we call? The police department. And so we have to have adequate services. And then we also have to have adequate accountability, right? You either go to the services, you either get help, you do this, or there's consequences. It's not right for our business community to have somebody's mental health out of control, homeless, pooping, sleeping on their front door. It's just not right. But it's also not right to just think, oh, I'll just go lock this guy up for this misdemeanor that they just committed, because they're going to be out in 4 hours with no mental health services and no any of that other stuff. And so we have to get our act together and start providing holistic care to serve the people that need it in our community, while also protecting everybody else's rights. We can protect all people's rights, but oftentimes we want a quick fix, and we want all those sort of things, and we want to point fingers instead of, okay, let's get serious, get in a room, and start planning out and funding what needs to be done for the most vulnerable people in our communities.
Thank you. We
Thank you.
hope we can help make a dent in that one of these days. Let's see. When we
I'll keep my answers shorter if we're taking up too much time, right?
You're doing great. We'll just throw a couple more questions your way. When we sell a house to somebody who's moving into a neighborhood, how can we help that relationship move in a positive direction between those people in that community and the police?
Yeah, I think one of the best ways is all neighborhoods are probably a little bit different, but they might have next door, they might have a neighborhood group. I know in my neighborhood, I've just seen signs going up lately on the corners of I don't know what they call it, the food truck event at the local park, and I'm thinking, oh, we should walk over there and we'll meet a whole bunch of people we don't know, because everybody likes food. But I would say it's a lot more effective if we help connect people, especially new people to a neighborhood, to those resources, as opposed to just expecting that they'll find them on their own. People are busy, going to their kids' practice, going to work, coming home, dealing with their house, dealing with sick parents or whatever they're dealing with. As real estate agents, it's why we provided bags of information to you, so you just hand it to them. Because I know you guys all give these awesome gift bags when people buy a house. I just refinanced my house, and they sent me one. I'm like, all right, refinance again tomorrow. Get me There's some alcohol in it, too. I'm not sure. But so I would say provide the resources for that specific neighborhood in a way that's really easy to consume for the person that's buying the house. So with your platter of fruit and coffee and all that, also give a bag of the resources in that neighborhood, the next door link or group, other things that can connect them to whatever resources in that neighborhood connect the whole neighborhood. Because us being together in a neighborhood is what protects our neighborhood. The neighborhoods that don't look at that car with a side eye are the neighborhoods that are more attractive to criminals. It's the same as if you park, some of you probably have that Porsche that you take up like 5 parking spots at Arden Mall, cross, and pisses everybody off because the parking lot's pissed, or parking lot's full. But if you take 2 different cars, one car, windows open about that much, doors not locked, purse sitting on the front seat, laptop sitting on the driver's seat. And then you take this other car parked in the same parking lot underneath a light, got a little alarm sticker on the window. All the doors are locked. When you look through the window, you see nothing but seats. If you're a criminal, which car are you picking? You're picking the easy one. So same with neighborhoods. If you're walking up and down the neighborhood with your backpack that looks completely empty and you're just cruising around on your bike, nobody's ever seen you before, and you just keep doing laps around the neighborhood and nobody pays any attention to you, that's an attractive neighborhood if you're a burglar. But if every time you drive down the street, Billy from the corner goes, "Hey, can I help you? What? Do you know somebody around here?" Or just walks out and looks at you. I can tell you every single time, now a lot of it's because of the last couple of years, I see a car that's parked in a weird spot. We have a long stretch across the street from our house that's basically the back fence of the house across the street. So nobody ever, and the mailbox is right there, nobody ever parks there unless they're pulling up for 10 seconds to get their mail and leave. So I saw a couple weeks ago a guy with the car running parked there in a car I've never seen before. It's none of my neighbors. I'm like, I just walked over, click, click, took a picture of his license plate in his car with my phone in broad, like he could see me. Click, click, he pulls off. I'm like, okay, now if I hear of any burglaries in the last couple of days, I'm going to give that license plate. But the message it sends to him, now maybe he was legit, now he's just calling his buddy that he was visiting. Neighbors are crazy. But if he was a burglar, he's going to go, don't go back to that neighborhood. They're taking pictures of your license plate and all sorts of stuff. So that's what we need to do.
We'll go through these last couple really quickly here. Thank you so much. Can you speak to the importance of youth sports as a kid? Did you participate, and how does that help in our community?
Yes, I think not just sports, but extracurricular stuff for our community. So when the schools over the last couple decades started eliminating the extracurricular, I played basketball and I performed in the marching band all through high school. We went to New York, Washington, D.C., performed in the Thanksgiving parade in New York. I think kids learn just as much from that stuff as they do in the classroom. My daughters they ran track when they were 6 or 7, been playing soccer since they were 3, and now both are playing high-level sports. But whether they play in college or not, for girls, that's it, college. There's not much after college. And I'm actually thankful. I'm so glad I don't have any knucklehead boys. But I've never had to tell my girls to do homework. If I had a son, trust me, I'd have to beat the snot out of him just to get him to do his homework, just like my mom had to do me. That would be her way of revenge to me, giving me a son, so she took mercy on me. But they learn leadership. They learn how to overcome challenges. Last night when PG beat up on St. Francis, they got stomped in the first set. And they got stomped again in the second set. And I always preach to my daughter, everybody makes mistakes. The mark of successful people and great people is how do they recover from their mistakes? Do they get in their head and shut it down, their arms get short, all these sort of things? Or do they go, serve it to me again? I want you to serve it to me. Don't serve it to nobody else. Give it to me, even though I shanked the last 3. I want it. And then they came back and won. That is a learning lesson that you can't teach in the classroom. So I think sports and other extracurricular activities are so critical, and it's why when we start taking music out of the schools, the bands out of the schools, start shutting down some of the sports programs, it's a shame. Because what I see when we hire police officers now are people that don't know how to talk to people the way we used to. And just look at how we grow up now. My mom had to send the National Guard out to get me to get back in the house. I wanted to be out of the house constantly, not because I disliked my mom, but I wanted to be at the park playing basketball. I wanted to be playing football in the middle of the street. I just wanted to be outside with my friends. And now, kids stay at home all day, all night, playing video games. And so there's nothing necessarily wrong with the video game, but we're not interacting with people. So now, as a police officer, that's what you do. You interact with people. And you see people that, officer goes on the call, maybe young officer, maybe new, goes on a call and somebody's pissed off and starts getting in their face. Like, man, that might be the first time they've ever dealt with that. That was like this 8,000th time I dealt with it when I first became a police officer. Like, my wife, things are the world is so much more dangerous now than it was when I was a kid. Not true. We just know about it. My daughter, they're 16 and 14. And still to this day, I guarantee you, if today they came home and had time, which they don't, and said, Mom, Dad, can I ride my bike to the park? My wife's first answer would be, no, you're going to get kidnapped. And I always tell her, babe, our oldest daughter was nationally ranked in track. Who's going to catch her? She's going to run. And I'm like, she's 16. Like, I was walking to kindergarten by myself. She's 16. But what that does is when you're out at the park or riding around your bike, sooner or later something's going to happen and you're going to have to figure out how to deal with it. Maybe somebody wants to fight you. Maybe a car is barreling down the street while you're in the crosswalk or something. You're going to have to figure it out. The dilemmas we had to figure out as kids were every single day. You got in a fight with your best friend today, tomorrow you're back being best friends, right? You had to deal with it. And so many kids today don't, and these extracurricular activities help them in that regards. So my daughters compete where, literally girls have raised their fist to punch, and I'm looking like, how you gonna deal with that? You better deal with it. Don't let her beat you up. So I think the extracurricular stuff is absolutely necessary for our kids. And unfortunately, when you're in the communities or you're a family that lives right on the line, every emergency, every critical thing that happens pushes you over that line. So housing, right? I'm renting my house for Sacramento. I don't know what rent is now, probably $8 million a month. But if you're a waitress, and when COVID hit, you surely got laid off. And now you can't pay your rent, so now you're homeless. But if you're me, I got the same pay as I got before COVID. The people with money made more money during COVID. But the people that live on the line, one thing pushes them over the edge. And so same with sports. I'll tell you right now, both my daughters play competitive sports. They stopped for maybe a month at the beginning of COVID, and then they were back at practice. That month was miserable. They couldn't go to school. They couldn't go to sports. And for two girls that are constantly on the move, go to school immediately to practice, sitting in your room 100% of the time was miserable. I was so thankful when the comp sports started up. But if you're in rec sports, it might not even be going now, but I just started. So it's like we expected kids in my neighborhood to stay in their apartment or their small house 24/7, while the people with funds, like my wife and I, our kids were still going to practice. Remember when Texas froze over last year? I was in Dallas for a full-blown volleyball tournament when COVID was raging and thousands of girls hitting the ball at each other, inches from each other's face. And trust me, it wasn't cheap. So if I didn't have money to do that, my daughter wouldn't have been participating. She would have been in her room still, holed up, looking at a TV screen or something. So.
Thank you so much for coming this morning, Chief Hahn. We'd love to connect
That
with
was
you
it?
about those resources. I know, we made it easy for you, right? For those resource packets that we gave out, but let's give them a hand, please.
Thank you.
We wish you the very best in your retirement, and let's stay in touch with you.
I need a job. Thank you.
Real estate license.
Oh, I don't know about that.